Our first roundtable discussion will look at environmental response and responsibilities. Moderating this panel will be Professor of Law Helen Kong, who directs the Environmental Law and Justice Clinic at Golden Gate University School of Law. Professor Kong and myself both call the Bay Area home, so I know she will be especially riveting. Now, in its third decade of service, the clinic provides high-quality legal representation to communities most burdened with pollution in the San Francisco Bay Area and beyond, while training law students in the ethical practice of environmental law. The clinic's current litigation and policy advocacy is focused on clean energy, safe drinking water, and reduced air pollution. Before joining the clinic, Professor Kong was a trial attorney with the U.S. Department of Justice. Throughout her career, she has successfully litigated numerous cases to reduce pollution and to improve public participation and regulatory accountability. She has also counseled grassroots groups and coalitions in formulating strategies for community organizing. She writes and speaks on issues including climate change, economic and social equity, and environmental enforcement. After graduating from Yale University, Helen obtained her law degree in 1986 from UC Berkeley, California. Thank you, Professor Kong. We welcome you.
Thank you, Chelsea, and the conference organizers. Thank you for having me to moderate this important panel, and I hope the conversations that we have today will continue beyond today. I'm going to call the panel participants up to the podium, and please take your seats. And for their biographies, please refer to the program. La Rhonda Bowen, Ombudsman for the California Air Resources Board. Yana Garcia, Staff Attorney for the Communities for a Better Environment. Kathleen Johnson, Director of the Enforcement Division for US EPA Region 9. Barbara Lee, Director of the California Department of Toxic Substances Control. Yael Masri, the Deputy in charge of the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office, Environmental Crimes and OSHA Section. Monsignor John Moretta, pastor of Resurrection Catholic Church in the Boyle Heights neighborhood of Los Angeles. Dr. Elisa Nicholas, project director and founder of Long Beach Alliance for Children with Asthma, known as La Baca, and chief executive officer of the Children's Clinic in Long Beach. Jerry Secundi, President and Chief Executive Officer of the California Council for Environmental and Economic Balance, pronounced SEEB. Francis Spivey Weber, Vice Chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. And finally, Dr. Barry Wallerstein, the Chief Executive or Chief Officer of the South Coast Air Quality Management District. Panelists, let me first lay out some ground rules for this discussion. We have a lot of thoughtful people with a lot of expertise on this panel, but a limited time for this discussion, and we want to hear from everyone. So let's be concise with our responses, and to achieve the goals of this morning's session, the focus will be on the scenario that we have. And if you have something to add, please raise your microphone so that I guess you can't really raise your microphone. Please give me a hand so that I can pay attention to you. Let me set the stage for our discussion this morning. Environmental justice communities, like the ones that I come in contact with every day, suffering from pollution impacts to their health and quality of life, often request improved coordination and responsiveness by public agencies and local government, be they federal, state, regional, or local. Community access to information, participation, and capacity building are key to addressing environmental justice impacts. We heard in the previous presentation about the various jurisdictional issues and jurisdictions involved in addressing environmental injustice. The goal of this panel will be to explore ways to improve cooperation between local, state, and federal agencies and to better involve the community in identifying problems and developing solutions. With that, let me pose a scenario, and I'm going to run this panel like I would my class, and pose some questions, and we're going to think hard about some of the questions. The hypothetical is this. Residents, and this is a pretty common hypothetical or common occurrence, hypothetical, but it happens in real life. Residents of a community report a foul odor, more likely it's foul odors, but which are causing children and adults to become sick. The odor occurs on some days, but not on others. It's transient. No one knows where the odor is coming from. In a real life scenario, residents pretty much know where the odors are coming from. But for today's discussion, we're going to assume that we actually don't know where the odor is coming from. And it could be from a factory, from smokestacks, or from fugitive emissions, maybe from a waste treatment plant, from water, or from land. And I'm going to pose a question before we go to the next part of the hypothetical. But so I'm going to use first names if that's okay. Elisa, you come into contact with a lot of people in the community. What do you do to alert the agencies about this issue?
Can you hear me now? Thank you. Well, I think prior to having an episode like this, what we have done and what we need to do is to really, I call it tilling the soil and activate the population. So really educating people as to what are the facts and the effects of air pollution and toxins on their health and well-being, and then give them the knowledge tools, but also the skill sets with which to act on that knowledge.
So,
and then to build the relationships as we do that. And I think those relationships are extremely important.
and when you say relationships in the community?
Not only in the community, but with the other agencies, both. So in Long Beach, we started the Long Beach Alliance for Children with Asthma in 1999 with Robert Wood Johnson funding. And the first thing we did was bring the different people to the table. Public health, the school district, the clinic I run, the children's hospital, but the community members who had been activated in other programs within our community. We had a juvenile crime prevention program. We had parents that were interested and already gotten training from the Kellogg Foundation to be able to speak, to run a meeting, to interact with leaders in their community. And we engaged the city council people and eventually our state assembly person who became our state senator is now our congressman. So we brought a group together and we educated them all as to what the issues were around health and pollution, and looked at it from many different aspects.
Okay, so focusing on this hypothetical with the odor, what would you do to activate the community and to alert
So the community would
local
be
agencies?
activated because we've already engaged them, and they would know that they could reach out to the South Coast Air Quality Management District because they have come and lectured us on many occasions. EPA has also been at the table with us, and the Public Health Department. So they would call on their own, but then we could activate our already existing group in our coalition that exists and try to make it so we're not all running around doing it together, but deciding who's going to take the lead and then how can we communicate with each other.
So you've already built that base and the foundation for that?
Yes.
Okay. Father John, what about you in Boyles Heights? If this were to happen in Boyles Heights, what would happen and how would you alert the agencies?
Unfortunately, it's not, would it happen? It does happen. It's not a hypothetical for us in Boyle Heights. I've been there 31 years, and it's something we live with daily. And certainly, we've been educated by the AQMD. We would call number one 800 cut smog, and hopefully some kind person from the AQMD would check out where the odor is coming from. And then we'd make religion. We would call the people up at Mass, and we would ask them, do they feel the same urgency? Do they feel that? And we would have a meeting about it. I meet with the community, for example, every Monday night for 17 years to discuss precisely different problems that come up like this in the environment or in the justice area, the problems with violence, whatever the community is concerned about. But we have addressed these issues. The frustrating thing is that the people that are committing these things, that we're hypothetical here, but I'm also talking from the reality of my experience. It's like they've always done this, and therefore we just have to suck it in. And
Now, I'm going to come back to you. So I'm going to ask
not too
Jerry the same question. Suppose you are a business in a community, and your employees come to you and say, we smell a horrible stench. The stench is interfering with our quality of life, and I can't work because I have a headache from the stench. What do you do as a business?
Well, first let me say, I would hope people don't view businesses as the enemy. We live in your community, we work in your community, our kids go to the schools in your community. We want to really be viewed as partners. Listening to Elisa, one thing I didn't hear in terms of your group was a business partner. Since we are there, we want to be partners with you. In terms of your scenario, in terms of the odor itself, the first thing I would try to do is find out where is the odor coming from. Shut down that unit if indeed it is coming from that particular facility. Odors are very, very difficult to determine. Is it the Salton Sea? Is it a sewer plant? Is it a refinery? Is it a facility? They're very difficult. As Dr. Wallerstein can probably tell you, it's just hard to determine it. But the safety of our employees is paramount. So certainly, if indeed the odor is coming from something within our facility, we would try to shut down that particular unit.
And what would you provide the resources to the community to identify the sources of the problem?
Let me put it this way. If indeed the first time we reach out to the community is when we have a problem, then we have failed. We need to have a partnership with the community long before there is a problem. We need to be working with them hand in glove. So yes, we would be working with the community, we would be reaching out to the community, we would be communicating with the community, because if indeed it's affecting our employees within our facility, it's obviously affecting people outside of the plant also.
Do you have examples of that kind of coordination and participation that you're talking of from real life that you can
From
tell
real
us
life,
about?
I can tell you that I've had a number of different positions. If people read my bio, one of the things I did is I worked for Atlantic Richfield Company. I was president of our pipeline companies. We had community outreach. We met constantly with our community leaders. We met with this local elementary school, which is right next to our facilities. So yes, real life. We provided them with libraries, we provided them with playgrounds, we provided them with health clinics, but mostly we provided them with communication.
So, Father John, Jerry comes to you and says, I want to be your partner. What do you expect from him, and has this happened to you in the past?
Yes, it has happened, and we always welcome the initiative of the local business people, and we've had some success. I can mention, it's not hypothetical, Darling Industries for one, a rendering plant. We have 4 of them that surround us from the city of Vernon, and some of them understand that they are a source of nuisance to us, and others are more difficult to deal with. But in our community right now, this is not a hypothetical. We are dealing with this with the rendering plants, and so we know that we would expect that you would be a good neighbor, and that what's amazing to me, and I don't know if any of you have been to these rendering plants. Just to give you an example, you talk about the employees. How can they allow these odors to affect their employees? And you get to a point that you want to vomit when you smell these odors, when you're at the plant site, the source of these odors. And I couldn't figure out, and I found out that within 2 weeks, the employees there, they've lost their olfaction, they've lost their sense of smell. And that's, to me, criminal. And this is how they can continue operating these plants with, the men and women don't go around with a mask, but because their system is shut down. So
So-
anytime a company wants to work with us, certainly we welcome that.
And what do you expect, and what are some of the things that really work for the community rather than these frustrations that come from companies that don't respond to some of the requests and some of the concerns that the
Well,
community has?
For example, I get back to the rendering plants, there's pits, there's open pits where they put these carcasses in. They get the roadkill, they get these animals, they get waste products from meat markets, all the bones, all these things are put in there, and it's on hot days, all those pits, all the odors come out of those pits. Close the pits, and they have. Some of them have done that and have made great progress. So what we expect is that they understand that they are a nuisance. They're a nuisance to the community, and we ask them. They know that it isn't. It
It's
isn't
not-
that you have to educate them. They know that you're doing that, and we ask them to address it.
So,
If I could just respond.
No, I'm going to really tightly control this because this is the friendly type seminar where I have the control over the panelists. I'm going to have fun today. So, Yael, you are an OSHA specialist, right, for the local Los Angeles district. What do you do when you hear that workers are losing their senses of olfaction because of the horrendous stench?
Well, I should correct you. I'm not an OSHA specialist. What the district attorney's office has an environmental crimes OSHA division, and we deal with workplace deaths. So or something that would be a life-threatening or tremendously serious situation. So in fact, our current district attorney, Jackie Lacey, was instrumental in creating our environmental and OSHA rollout program where we would assist first responders once they notify us of an OSHA death or environmental workplace incident. They would notify us. We collaborate with the first responders, with OSHA, and with our own DA investigators. We make a determination as to whether or not it would be effective or helpful or useful at that time to respond to the scene. And then the goal of our response would be that if it is safe and practicable for us to respond, and we think that it would be of use to the agency and they want us to be there, we go and we assist where they may need help, whether it would be in the overseeing of collection of evidence, of making sure to interview witnesses. We want to make sure that we can secure environmental justice at the earliest stage. So for example, if there is an OSHA incident or an environmental incident where at the time we're not really sure, is it an accident that maybe could not have been avoided? Is it an accident that should have been avoided? Is it a willful violation of some rule? And we're not really sure when we respond, is it going to be a crime or not? But when you look at the circumstances and facts, and it appears that maybe it could be, and you need the district attorney's office assistance so that the responding agency can make sure that they have a proper investigation and then refer it to us for filing consideration, we want to make sure that we're of assistance at that point, because many times those cases don't come to us for potentially a year or longer. And at that point in time, it's very difficult to collect evidence or perhaps to get interviews and information from people when the circumstances may not be fresh in their mind, where they might have an incentive to not speak freely any longer, where there could be lawyers involved or other things. So we want to make sure that at that point, if we are useful and we're not doing something that obstructs the first responders, that we can do that so that when the case does come to us, that whatever is given to us is a packet of information that we've recovered, as much information as feasibly possible to ensure that if the case is something to be filed either as a criminal or a civil prosecution, that we've preserved the proper evidence to effectively do that.
Okay, so let's say, Jana, you get complaints like this a lot at Communities for a Better Environment. You contact the South Coast Air Quality Management District. What do you want South Coast to do? What do you expect?
First and foremost, I would expect trust of the report and immediate response. Sometimes, and far too often, actually, we get a delayed response, particularly with odors. Odors can go away, wind patterns can change. Sometimes the odor is no longer there by the time the response comes. Like Father John mentioned, this is really a scenario that we come across all the time. And realistically, it is incredibly difficult to identify which facility it is in environmental justice communities throughout Los Angeles, throughout the state, simply because there are so many heavy polluting facilities concentrated in these areas, concentrated in these communities, impacting residents every single day. It's also very realistic that you could have a strong odor, and that odor may not be the cause of nausea, it may not be the cause of the health impacts that are being felt. And I really like the concept of tilling the soil, and I would urge everybody in this room who understands environmental justice issues to till the soil on the agency's end. Cumulative impacts are incredibly, incredibly harmful to our communities, and it should not fall on the communities to identify exactly where the odor is coming from, exactly what is the cause of their symptoms, and to bear the burden of always responding, making sure that the agencies are doing their jobs. The truth is that the authority and the responsibility to account for these types of impacts lie in the agencies themselves. So we can't always rely on the community members to do the job of the agencies for them.
So I'm understanding you to say the agencies really ought to be there in the first place because they know which facilities cause odors.
Yes,
It's not
they should know that.
rocket science to know that rendering plants cause odors, waste treatment plants cause odors, and so the agencies ought to be there. And when the reports come in, there should be investigators to go out to the place to investigate it and to respond to that. Barry, what are the limitations that you as an agency have with these expectations, and what can agencies do to better serve communities that every day face these problems?
Well, first I want to note that when we do get a complaint, we do send an inspector out. But as Jana was just mentioning, in a large geographic area such as ours, odors can be fleeting, and by the time the inspector gets there, the odor may have disappeared. But if we get another complaint, we go back out, and to the degree that the community members are keeping notes and working with us, we can look at days of the week, time of day, and so on, and then have our inspectors actually go by locations to see if they can detect the odors. I think, one of the key words we've heard this morning is communication, and I think the communities that are having, significant community-based complaints like odors, when they get organized and raise their voices together, that it helps us because we get more information upon which we can do our science-based work. And of course, it's a matter of us doing the evaluation, transparency, getting the information back to the community, and us being responsive. I had a community meeting this week, and preparing for today, I was thinking about, okay, it's all about building trust between the community and the agency addressing the problem. And so what would I define as success? If at the end of the day, we're able to solve the problem and the agency is viewed not as an outsider but a member of the community, to me, that's the ultimate goal. And I think we're able to do that in a number of cases, not every case. Of course, we'd like to do it in every case. But I think that forums like this provide an opportunity for us to open the lines of communication, build the trust, and hopefully your communities, if you have a problem, will be adopting the AQMD as a member of your community.
Kathleen, what does that mean to build trust with a community for an agency? What would agencies do to build that trust?
I think it's very difficult especially when there's not very many regulators and there's a lot of community people, and it's hard for us to be everywhere where we would like to be. So when we're only there on occasion, it is hard to build that trust. I think one of the things that's very frustrating is that not only do we have resource limitations, but there are sometimes gaps in the regulations. We're talking about an odor issue. That is often not regulated at the federal level. There's a lot of things we do regulate, but there's a lot of things we don't regulate. And I know that can be frustrating because we can't offer a solution in every case. But I think it's important that we be able to talk openly and honestly about what we can and what we can't do, and to try to figure out what can be done by someone. I think one of the roles that EPA can play is as a convener. So sometimes you might have a situation where there's an odor and we don't think it's an air issue, it might be a water issue, maybe it's a waste issue. Sometimes what we can do is bring together all of those agencies that might have a piece of that problem and brainstorm together about what can be done.
And how does the community access that kind of convening from EPA? What would the community have to do to access that service?
You know, different ways. They can certainly contact us and ask us if there's a problem that is festering that they don't think they're getting traction on. Ray mentioned earlier the Fern and the Ivan. We think that's a really good model, and we are able to support that, at least at this point. We, I think, have someone on every one of those groups, and that's a way to kind of work through them.
Tell us more about that.
So the way that works is if a community member sees a problem, they report it through their email system to their, I forgot what the name of the problem solver. And the problem solver tries to figure out which agency has ownership over that issue. So they may take it to DTSC, they may take it to the water board, they may take it to the county. And ideally, if the system is working right, if it's not DTSC's issue, we'll figure out, well, whose issue is it? And is EPA the right agency to deal with it? Then we would own that issue. So it's a way to keep individuals from having to try to figure out that jigsaw puzzle of agencies.
Mm-hmm. Barbara, what would it take to institute a system like that at your agency where you can respond to this system like Ivan?
Actually, the Department of Toxic Substances Control funded the original Ivan program in Imperial County, and we are a big supporter of the Ivan network, the Ivan approach. So the issue of expanding it is really a matter of working with additional communities. I think we're up to about 8 sites now, or 8 groups now, and we are committed to expanding our efforts in this regard. Always it comes back to resources and finding ways to share the resources, but also having good community partners to work with. Ray Leon has been a wonderful community partner to work with. Luis Olmedo has also been a wonderful community partner to work with, and we're anxious to expand that effort and do more of that work.
Francis, are you in this kind of scheme where something like Ivan works with the State Water Resources Control Board or the regional board?
Quite frankly, I'm learning about Ivan right here.
Great.
It's very exciting. It is the type of thing that our regional boards do. I'm mostly knowledgeable about what the regional board does here in LA, and we work very closely with DTSC and the EPA and the communities as and the regional board as well as the state board to address these issues. And I think the key, and Ivan is an example, is getting out in front. It's what Jerry mentioned as well. Getting out in front of the problem. If the relationships have to be built around a crisis, it takes a long time, and it's problematic. Mm-hmm. And so we have to. These kinds of programs have to get established and work. And the key there is resources and finding the money. And I think that, again, that's where your federal agencies, state agencies, elected officials, local agencies can step in and say, okay, this is going to be our priority for 2015 and 2016. We're going to get these things from 8 to 108. That's how we're going to have to move.
So let's go back to the hypothetical. So there's this odor, and a community member contacts the regional board. What would the regional board do?
They like DTSC or like the AQMD would send out an investigator, and often something like that will have dissipated, and that's a challenge legally. And so, but the regional board in LA now has a facilitation capability that they did not have even a year ago. They are on speed dial with DTSC and their folks, and what we need to be is more on speed dial with AQMD. We aren't.
And how could that happen? What would it take to make that happen?
It takes time, and it takes people putting money into the, maybe
Well, it's
Barry-
going to happen now.
Barry wants to talk.
Because now I know about it.
Exactly.
That's great.
We all have lots of responsibilities, too much work, not enough people, and so we make choices every day about how we're going to spend time. If we're going to spend time getting to know the communities and our state partners and regional partners, it is going to take time, and so that's something.
And it
that
has to start somewhere.
It has to start, but the legislature's got to understand that that's important too, because it's going to make their jobs eventually easier.
Okay.
Not necessarily.
And so
short
that
term.
the communities can have a part in that by educating the legislature.
Exactly.
So Los Angeles has that at the regional board. Do other regional boards have this similar structure or a speed dial? And, yeah.
No.
No, okay. And
But
who's responsible for that?
Every regional board is somewhat autonomous and can make decisions. Every regional board wants it. They are looking for resources to do it. LA stepped up and actually turned one of their existing positions into a community outreach position, and
That's key.
Responsible and extraordinary.
Right.
And so it costs them. It costs them in other areas where they also have responsibilities. So
Right.
it was good.
Yes. And what about the Air Resources Board, LaRonda? How does it coordinate, and how does it respond to complaints, like the odor complaints?
We are part of the Ivan Network. Water is too. We work with we have something we call strike teams, which is where there's an actual problem that you have reported the problem to your first responder, the fire, or your local air district, or your local water board, but you need modeling, or you need monitoring, you need additional support. That's what the California Air Resources Board can provide, so we come out and we're able to spend the day, set up monitoring, and see what actually is coming from that source once that source is identified, or if it's an area source and we can't identify it, we can help support the local air district in terms of air monitoring and see what direction the wind is blowing, and do more refined monitoring and modeling. So that's on the scientific side. In terms of how do we get input from the community, normally if you have an idling truck kind of complaint, you might report that first to your local air district. But if you didn't do that, or you were on a highway and you weren't sure where you were or what the air district was, you were on 5 somewhere, for example, you could report that to the Air Resources Board. We have a 1-800-END-SMOG number, or you could report it to our through the internet if you wanted to the Ombudsman's office. Or we also have an address for the, that goes directly to our enforcement folks. And so,
Are you the first responder, so to speak, for a community to contact?
we
with
are
these?
not generally first responders. We are support to the first responders.
I wasn't very clear. Are you personally the person that communities would contact with these issues?
Sure, I'm the ombudsman, so the ombudsman's job is to help prevent and solve problems and communicate. So we try to do that in a number of ways. But we are not the only ones. Obviously, the Air Resources Board has to cover the entire state. So we have the teams that collaborate with local air districts in terms of enforcement priorities. So the air district might say, because the community has contacted them, this is an enforcement priority, or this is an area. So for example, in the port area, we have reduced air pollution there by about 50% from the trucks, but 50% is not enough, you know. But we do enforcement actions, and we involve the community, and we work with the local district. So for example, it's my understanding that there's a project going on now where the local community members it was a youth engagement project where the local community identified where trucks were idling in their neighborhood. So they documented that, and they provided that information, and then we were able to do some enforcement in that area in combination with the local air district. But the thing that I learned yesterday, it was really exciting, is that the community is going to have a Thank the Truckers Day. They're going to go out, they're going to have signs just acknowledging the work that's been done. And I think what's missing so far in this conversation, it is so important that you guys are not only identifying where the problems are, but you're also identifying where the successes are. That's what we need to know, because best practices, how do we get from where we are to where we want to be? You guys see that, you know, we see it as Barbara pointed out so clearly, in our individual areas of responsibility. But being
So let's turn that to the odor hypothetical that we have. So you had a real success with the idling issue. How would you apply that success to this hypothetical?
Again, so the separation is, we do mobile sources primarily, the local district does stationary sources. So assuming that we were working with the local district, which we would do, and the community, which they would already have those relationships established, I think it would be a great idea where things have worked. When I was at South Coast, we had odor problems. And where you have found success, getting them to cover something, to celebrate that success. And
replicate it. So, you know, CARB is not the first responder, but it is the overseer, right, of the air districts, and it does have. I believe CARB actually issued a report on the odor rules at the various districts. Are you seeing that some districts actually have better rules than others?
I have not followed the odor issue closely, but I would assume that South Coast, partly because I work there and I know how hard they work, and probably San Joaquin Valley because they have a lot of rendering and a lot of issues there. I don't know for sure, but I would say I would look to those two agencies as a starting place.
And is that something that CARB would do? Look at the rules and maybe make recommendations on how to improve the rules at the different agencies?
We do collaborate with the agencies that way. Consumer products is one area where there are local district rules. And so actually you might have regulations. The feds don't have too many regulations on odor. We might have state engagement with the local districts. We can work with all of the agencies, and we each can have regulations that are more stringent than the other. But from the business point of view, what we try to do is harmonize those regulations wherever possible. So that could work with odor.
Okay.
I'm not aware of an example right now.
So LaRonda mentioned something really important, which is that we need to figure out where things are working, what examples there are of successes, and to possibly replicate them if they actually fit the local conditions. Does anybody have a really good example of how odor issues have been resolved successfully? Barry?
Well, when we get odor complaints, one of the things we do besides sending out an inspector is we will actually use equipment to detect different types of chemicals that lead to particular types of odors. We also take trailers that are full of equipment and take them into neighborhoods and leave them there to monitor on a 24-hour basis the odors. And we also have devices that we can activate by cell phone, so that if we get a phone call that there's an odor issue, we can actually take an air sample at the time of the odor issue, and we leave canisters with community members to trigger themselves when there's an odor. So there's a lot of tools we bring when we get an odor. I think a good example of an odor success was in the community of Mecca in the southeastern part of the Coachella Valley, where there was a company that was receiving waste materials, storing it in open ponds, letting it evaporate out of the ponds, causing odor impacts to nearby schools, significant impacts. And we were able to work very well with DTSC and EPA. And in this case, it was tribal land and the tribe. And each of the environmental agencies brought a different ability to the table to help get the odors addressed. And in fact, we had a success there, and we used the type of equipment that I mentioned to be able to help narrow down the exact causes of the odor.
Barry, tell us about the organizational commitment you had to make as the Air District for this issue, because I remember seeing in 2009 you were the first Air District to make this commitment to tackling odor issues. What did it take, and what does it take at the organizational level to have this be something that Air Districts take seriously?
Well, once you determine that in fact there is a significant odor problem in a community, and then you bring in the different types of equipment that I mentioned. In the case of the events in Mecca, we actually moved in equipment, and our equipment was vandalized. And we, as an agency, took the step of putting actually a security guard there 24/7 to protect our equipment, so we could be able to get the data we needed to be able to take enforcement action and to very clearly identify chemically the fingerprints of relative to the sources of the pollution. The most important part is for us is to get the science right, because we need the science behind our actions relative to enforcement.
What kinds of fingerprinting can these techniques actually do?
We're fortunate that we were able to take air samples into the lab and do a full spectrum of chemical analyses that give us chemical fingerprints. We're also fortunate that we have portable devices that we can take into the field that do that. And then there are separate devices that help us to identify different varieties of chemicals.
So you could actually pinpoint the source, the industrial source.
We can pinpoint, in most cases, the source. Also, for all of you that are a fan of sriracha sauce, I've been to the factory several times. I've been on the roof of the factory. We worked with the owner to develop a pollution control approach. We studied his process to look at what types of chemicals were coming off from the materials that were causing the odors, and ultimately it led to resolution between the factory owner and the city, so it was a great success.
So it sounds like you actually provided expertise or technical support to the company to be able to resolve the problem?
What was wonderful about, the answer is yes, but what was wonderful about that situation was we were a technical expert to the company and to the city, and an honest arbiter of the situation and what could be done.
So that's a really great model. But what I was referring to also was, I think as an organization or as an agency, you made a commitment back in 2008 or 2009 that this was an issue to focus on, that this was an issue that environmental justice communities experience, and these issues really affect the quality of their lives. And so as an organization, you made a commitment. What did that process take? Was it an initiative from one of the directors, or is it something that you yourself committed to tackle? How do other districts replicate that model?
Well, it comes in different forms. So in the case of Mecca, we had the school district approaching us and the local elected officials approaching us about the issue, as well as the community members themselves. I can think of another instance not too far from here, where we were contacted, the community became very organized, they received a great deal of media attention. I personally went by on a Saturday, didn't identify myself just to see if I could detect the odors, talked to community members walking down the sidewalk, had a meeting later that day with Chairman Burke, and I was telling him about it, and he said, well, let's get in the car and go down there, and we both went down there and put down the windows, and we could smell the odor, and it was real. So then the question is, now let's do the science and figure out what is the best solution to the causes.
So let's talk about going back to the trust issue. You said you had to go there and smell it, and you confirmed that it was real. And Jana earlier said, believe us, when we call you, we're not calling you just to call you. So Jana, what do you see, and what do you want to see more of from the agencies when communities call to say this is real?
I mean, I think Dr. Wallerstein mentioned a couple of technological advances that sound like they could offer some support in real time. Real-time monitoring would be great. Continuous air emissions monitoring would be great. Continuous odor monitoring would be fantastic. I think in the spirit of talking about some things that have worked on the part of the agency and specifically on the part of the AQMD, in the case of Exide, for example, in the city of Vernon, the Air District has provided some really great, meaningful, participatory processes in the community. The problem is that in that particular case, it came a little too late, and a little is an understatement. That
So
facility
focusing
had been,
back on the hypothetical, what kind of help would be, when you say too late, how would we turn it around to say, you know, what would be a good thing to do to change that around?
early response, early and immediate response.
So when communities complain about the issue and
Absolutely,
the
I think-
district learns about it, you would like to see that technical equipment going out?
Yes, when communities complain, when there are notices of violation issued by other agencies, there needs to be more agency coordination. I think with a bifurcated sort of authority regime where the Air District is not necessarily paying attention to enforcement matters in the jurisdiction of another agency, say, for example, the Department of Toxic Substances Control, and a facility is allowed to operate for decades on end with violation after violation after violation after violation and no permit, and there's no action, and it falls on the community to take an action or urge their agency or elected representatives to take an action. I think that's problematic. I think that extends beyond trusting a complaint. That's simply looking at facts and seeing where the problems are.
So, Barbara, what would you, again, focusing back on the hypothetical, what would you do to coordinate with the Air District on something like the Exide matter?
Okay, so I'm not sure if you want me to focus on the hypothetical or
Let's
on
do the hypothetical, because I realize the
But
Exide
let me-
matter is
let
a
me
hot
just-
button issue.
It is a hot button issue, and I've only been in this job for a couple months here. But I will tell you that I have already been out and I have met with the community on more than one occasion. I've been working with the Air District. We have had a couple of coordination meetings. initially on just this facility, but also I asked my staff to give me a list of areas where we're aware that there are community concerns, where we have actions coming up in the coming year that we think we need community engagement on, where we think there would be some intersection with air issues around the same facilities. We've met with the South Coast, with Barry and his, some of his key management folks to go over these sites and these actions that are pending, to talk about what we need to do together to make sure we're having a more coordinated, more inclusive, more effective approach to ensuring that community issues are considered and public health and the environment are protected. It's a commitment I have made, and I feel very, very strongly about it. I do appreciate that on this particular hot button issue, there's a terrible history behind us.
And that always haunts the current relationships.
And I am doing everything I can to move us forward in a better direction.
Would it actually work better to have a protocol that agencies work out to perhaps tackle these kinds of challenges where you have multi-agency or multi-district or multi-agency jurisdictions for a problem? Do you have a protocol set up already, or would it help to have a protocol set up?
So within Cali, PA, but within the California Environmental Protection Agency, which coordinates the Air Board, the Water Boards, the Department of Toxic Substances Control, Pesticide Regulation, and the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, within that office, we do have that coordinating function. We, within the office, we have a centralized mechanism for triaging complaints that come in to make sure if it comes into DTSC and it's really more of a water issue and they have the jurisdiction to respond, we get it to them right away.
Is that
So
a
there
written
is-
protocol?
That is a working protocol, and we do use it. There is a centralized mechanism to do that. We also have a coordinated enforcement effort where we select communities to do a deeper dive on the enforcement end. We did one in Fresno last year. We're looking at doing a couple of communities, probably in the Southern California area this year, and we hope we're going to be rolling that out soon. And a number of the folks at this table have been part of the early conversations on the selection of those communities. And so that's a coordinated enforcement effort that includes more than just Cali, PA, and the state level agencies. The Air District is involved, the LA County and other Coupa folks. It's a much more comprehensive approach. And I've also been talking with our partners about possibly expanding that beyond simply coordinated enforcement, but to fill in other gaps as we identify them and go forward.
Father John, were you aware of this protocol, and how would, do you have any suggestions to these agencies, since they're all here, about what that protocol should look like and how these agencies should pick the communities that they would focus on as priorities?
Well, always the squeaky wheel gets the attention, unfortunately, and that's part of the axiom of life. And it's the community very often has to go into the streets. The community often has to get the attention of our elected officials, and we've done all the above. And we know, she alluded to the fact of the past history of the DTSC. Everybody in this room that's involved in EJ knows very well the past history of the DTSC. And we were very grateful for the collaboration with her office and with her personally coming out to meet with the community just on this one particular issue. But again, the left hand has to know what the right hand is doing, and often with these agencies, we find that there's not always that same, what do you want to say, holistic, or the cooperation isn't always there. We have found in the past that we're thrown from one group to another group, and it isn't always the best way to do that. They'll tell you, well, we're the land, we only take care of the land, and then, well, we do the air, we only do the air. But the problem is that from the land comes the air.
So-
And
so,
it is a whole problem. It isn't just one.
Right.
One.
It has to be coordinated, and that's
Yes.
the focus of this. So, Alyssa, you had successes convening agencies and getting their year. What are your suggestions, focusing on the hypothetical, to get agencies to coalesce and to coordinate and to respond to communities better? Huh? I'm sorry, yes.
Lisa, okay. I do want to add a comment, the importance of knowing the toxicity of the odor as a pediatrician and a public health practitioner, because that really determines the urgency of the response. And we have had odor issues around our hospital and community health center, and we didn't know where they were coming from. My staff was saying they couldn't work. People were coming into the hospital. So I think it's wonderful that AQMD can get their mobile units out there. And I think the most important thing is to then feed that back through the public health system and the healthcare providers so that we can know how to respond to our community in that. And then, of course, the urgency with which you have to address that odor. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Jerry, the protocol that agencies have, do you as CEEB have participation in this kind of coordination? And what would you like to see from the agencies on coordination?
Well, just a couple of things. We actually meet with each of these agencies individually on a very, very frequent basis. We meet with Dr. Wallerstein and his staff on at least a monthly basis. Barbara, we welcome you. And as she knows, we are going to be meeting with her on a very frequent basis. I used to be the vice chair of the State Water Resources Control Board, so I meet with that board on a very frequent basis. I have seen a great deal of progress in terms of the cooperation and communication amongst these various agencies. Even though Cal EPA was originally formed, putting everybody in one building so they would talk to one another, there were still silos there. Those silos are starting to break down, and there's much better communication at this point in time. So we meet with them individually. Sometimes we do meet with them collectively, but I will have to say that we never have a problem getting in and talking to people. They're very, very cooperative on that. Just one other point, back to your scenario. One of the other things that we have instituted for many of our members is there's a refinery odor hotline. And sometimes it's a little quicker, forgive me, Barry, than the AQMD because they're right there. So if the community calls the refinery odor hotline, they get a very quick response, and they really do jump into action.
And what can CEEB contribute to the technical expertise that the community needs to identify problems and to resolve them? And to really get at, or at least that's a point about toxicity, what can CEEB do to make sure that the communities that the businesses are in are not harming the health of the communities?
I'm going to go back to communication. We're not a scientific agency, not a scientific trade association. On the other hand, we do put out white papers, and one of the things we try to explain to the community is there's a difference between greenhouse gases, toxics, and criteria pollutants. Many people kind of merge all three of these together, and they're very distinct, they're very different, they're controlled under very different regulations, and they have very different health impacts. Greenhouse gases certainly have a major problem in terms of climate change, but breathing in carbon dioxide is not going to kill you. Breathing in some of the toxics is really going to harm you, is what it amounts to. So I think from our point of view, what we try to do, in fact, we have just written another white paper, differentiating amongst these three different air pollutants so that people understand the differences and how they can respond to them.
Ms. Berry.
One of the things we're doing to augment our town hall meetings is when we have a EJ community that we're focusing on, we set up an advisory group and invite leaders from the community, including the EJ activists, to come to the meetings. And for those meetings, we're inviting other agencies to enhance collaboration, coordination. In fact, we have a group such as that in the Boyle Heights area. As part of those discussions of that committee, the rendering plant issue came up. And in fact, my staff's working on a rendering plant-related rule that will come to our board in the next couple of months. I also wanted to mention that the collaboration can take different forms. Yana is absolutely correct about, gee, it'd be great to be able to have low-cost monitors in a community, that the AQMD could receive the data, the community could receive the data. In fact, we have a grant proposal to US EPA that is CBE working in partnership with the AQMD. If we get the grant funds to go ahead and deploy monitors like that in the community. Lastly, I'd like to say the technology is evolving quickly. Barbara Lee, when she, in her previous role at an air district, was leading a national effort, and we're at South Coast leading a state effort to test these new monitors and see which ones work. So then if we have complaints about odors from a community, we'll be able to give the community members monitors, and then we'll receive the data and be able to do our technical work.
Great. Francis, we've now heard from a couple of people about meetings that groups can have with organizations or agencies. What does your agency do to encourage community partners to come in and meet with you on a monthly basis, for example?
At the regional board level, every region is somewhat different, but usually if we're dealing with some sort of permit, there will be lots of local engagement. There is not, as far as I know, a standard approach to bringing in community leaders when there is no permit on the table or when there's not some issue on the table. But I think that's a lesson I can take back to both our organization at the state level as well as at the local level to start looking into that. I think that would be an improvement in our relationships.
And what about you, Kathleen? Do you have community members coming into Region 9, Office of Enforcement, to discuss with you some of the concerns that communities have? And do you have a formalized way of inviting community partners to your office?
You know, one of the things we did last year was we hosted the first ever for us EJ Teach-In. And I'm sure many of you in the audience participated in that as well. And the notion behind that was you all come in and meet with us and tell us what you think. And that formed the basis of our EJ plan that we have in Region 9. And one of the pillars of that plan is that as we do our enforcement targeting, we look through our various tools. EPA has a tool, the state has a really good tool, in order to make sure that the enforcement we are doing is in those areas where it can be most impactful to public health. As it turns out, a lot of our enforcement is naturally in those areas because that's where industry is. But that's one way we have of coordinating with the communities. But I wanted to say one other thing, which was a lot of times what communities see is facility specific. What I think we don't do a good job of is talking about the things that we do which are more generic but very impactful. And I'll give you an example. CARB has some very powerful laws about what trucks and buses on our highways need to have in terms of pollution control. It's better than what the federal government has, but it's in the state implementation plan, so it becomes federally enforceable. So CARB has been doing a really good job of enforcing those laws, but they were having trouble reaching the fleets that weren't home-based in California. So we're partnering with CARB to deal with the fleets that are in the other parts of the country, because that's something we can bring to the table uniquely as the federal government. And that is a partnership. That's an enforcement targeting partnership that I don't think anybody really understands, that that kind of thing happens, and it happens at all levels with the Water Board, with DTSC.
So we're talking about information being accessible to communities to understand what the agencies do, and also part of that may be agencies informing the communities about how they could participate in developing solutions at the various levels of government. how can communities be part of that, the development of solutions? Yes.
At the Air Resources Board, you ask about meeting monthly. We do have a monthly meeting with the environmental and health advocates, representatives from organizations like the Lung Association, community groups, Coalition for Clean Air, Sierra Club, different organizations. And while those meetings typically focus on the issues on our board agenda, if there are other things that are going on, they are often raised. And when that happens, we're also able to share that more broadly. Also, the Air Resources Board formed an environmental justice task force for AB 32, and they met extensively in the beginning, but they met last year to help inform the spending plan, for example, out of the cap and trade revenues, and that the scoping plan has to be updated every 5 years. And so that's another opportunity as we look forward, what needs to be done, not just retrospectively, but looking ahead, the opportunity for the communities to have input into how their communities look as part of the Sustainable Community Strategy, SB 5 you'll hear, but also working through your leadership and encouraging them to bring your issues up when they meet with the Air Board on a monthly basis.
So we have about 4 minutes. So what I would like to do is go through the panelists and talk about what they see as the critical role that communities have in contributing to the development of solutions, and how that conversation could happen better with agencies. So
One of the critical roles I see communities having is your own convening. Again, I'm the ombudsman, so I tend to focus on the solutions to the problems. As you go through your community, look at your businesses there as assets, as much as you can see them as problems, and form these relationships and collaborations and try to figure out what you can do together, because you're going to need each other, and we all need each other anyway. But then when you run into a hitch, something that you can't do, that's a good time to reach the state agency. You can call the Air Resources Board, the ombudsman, that's me, or you could call anybody at this table that represents a state agency. Our job is to try at the state level to figure out how to solve problems before they happen, how to prevent them from happening. So use your businesses, your local businesses, as assets and resources. You bring a set of information to them, they bring a set of information to you. And we, the Air Resources Board, are looking to decarbonize the transportation sector. So when you see a gasoline service station as an example, because we focus on mobile sources, you might ask them, have you considered becoming a hydrogen station? Have you considered putting in an EV charger? Things that can help move your community forward. I think those are great tools, and access us anytime, email or phone.
Mark's going to be very unhappy with me if I don't focus your answers on the hypothetical. So your closing comments, if you could focus on the hypothetical, on what solutions or part the community can play in formulating those solutions. Yana?
So I'll go back to the point of community knowledge. Our knowledge is incredibly important. By definition, environmental justice communities are largely under-resourced. We don't have the technical expertise often. We can train, and we have an immense amount of knowledge in our communities, but we don't have the same type of knowledge that is valued necessarily at the agency. And I think that there has to be a cultural sort of paradigmatic shift in how we really value the knowledge that's coming directly from the source. And so I'd urge the agencies to kind of figure out how to incorporate that better at an earlier stage.
I'm going to answer your question very narrowly and creatively. So I'm going to assume that the odor was caused by someone who was violating a federal law, and we took an enforcement action to deal with it. And as part of that, there was a penalty. We would love to offset penalties through supplemental environmental projects. we can't have communities as a direct party in a negotiation, but what we can do is get a list of things that communities really would like to see for us to tap into when we can do supplemental environmental projects. The state has an even better system than we do. Shout out to Roger Kinsk, who I was talking to earlier today. That's my
So I appreciate Kathleen's lead-in. Roger Kintz works for DTSC. We do have a proposal for supplemental environmental projects on the streets right now that we're looking for input in. So that's one important way that you can help us getting those pilot projects off the ground. We also are interested in continuing the collaboration, expanding the collaboration around the community enforcement networks like IVAN. I would also urge you, when you are trying to work with us, you know, everyone wants us every place all the time, and we don't have enough resources to do that, but you can partner with us to help be those resources. Dr. Wallerstein was mentioning efforts to improve personal scale monitoring equipment. This is going to give us an avenue to have you be inspectors for us on some level and help get us information. But even if you don't have the technological equipment yet, you can get out there and use your eyes and ears and nose, your wristwatch. You need to tell us where you are, when it is, what you saw, what you smelled, every detail you can give us about what it is, like this odor scenario or other scenarios, so that when we get that information, we have facts in there that can form the legal basis to take action.
I would pair. Can you hear me? I would pair it actually what all these ladies have said, and the devil is in the details. The district attorney's office, like I said before, is not a first responder agency, but we have relationships with leaders in the EJ community. There have been people that have called or given complaints, and our lawyers have tried to direct them to where they need to go. Nobody wants to be told, I don't know the answer to that, and I can't help you, and that it's not my job, and pass the buck. As part of what the district attorney's office does is we have a task force, a monthly task force, and we meet with people from all these different agencies as well as others. And sometimes, you know, when something happens, and obviously we're not the first responders, we direct that information and we have discussions about your concerns in our task force. And while they are not public forums, it is a forum where we do address and work collaboratively with other agencies to address those public concerns and to see what we can do to help the communities.
The critical role that communities have, I believe, this theme of today is environmental justice, and I think the communities act as the conscience. We are the conscience in that environmental justice. I think often we are also the victims. We're the ones that when we say something, we're doing it often from a viewpoint or from a real reality of suffering. We are the victims. And finally, I think we also act as a catalyst for all these agencies that are gathered here today to do something about it. We encourage you. We may be obnoxious sometimes. We may want not to answer our pleas, but we are the people that try to put the conscience a face to environmental justice.
I see the patients.
You got it on.
Yeah. I see the patients that we serve, the low-income population living along the freeways, affected more than others. But I think we need to get the message out to everyone, because in Long Beach we saw the Coke piles weren't covered and there was dust everywhere, and that dust was on the patios of the oceanfront condos as well as in the houses of the poor families that we served. And it was both of those groups being affected with the knowledge and the data that has been, you know, promulgated, and we all are learning so much more. that we could raise the political will to make changes. And I think that's extremely important. In 1999, when we started Labaka, we didn't have all the knowledge that we have now. And it was really through the AQMD and USC and Andrew Rico's work. They took that knowledge, they simplified it, and it was evidence-based, and they brought it to the community in ways we could all understand it. And that really changed the discourse. So I encourage us to all continue to do that. We had EPA at the table, we had AQMD, we had USC Environmental Health, giving concise, accurate messages to the community, and that gives them power, in addition to training them on how to be advocates and speaking and to partner.
I'd make 2 points. Please don't shut us out as businesses. Make us your partner. Make us part of your community organizations. When we reach out, please don't refuse that hand that we're reaching out, and don't lump us all together. Businesses are very diverse. Yes, there are some bad characters, but most are not. So please use us as your partners. We want to do that. Secondly, be very active in your local communities, especially your planning departments. As you mentioned, freeways. Land is cheap next to freeways. Land is cheap next to facilities. Land is cheap next to refineries. Why do you allow housing and schools to be built right next door? That doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. We have a wonderful example here in LA, and regretfully there was an arson, and they right now have burned down, but a whole long list of apartment buildings are being built right next to the joining of the harbor and the Pasadena Freeway, 10 feet from the freeways. That's ridiculous, in my opinion.
No.
I will urge everyone, as has been the case here, on odor or any other issue that you encounter, clearly getting to know your regional folks on the water boards. The Division of Drinking Water has regional offices as well. DTSC and AQMD are all regional. But in terms of convening to make sure that everyone is there who has resources or who has authority, you may need to have a state or federal convener or someone to step in to bring everyone together to make this a high enough priority. The governor's office is actually quite good at doing this sort of thing, as is Cali PA, the state agencies themselves. And so I would, while you need to focus on your local agencies, I would not forget the power of the convener at the state level or at the federal level.
Continue to contact us. Continue to participate. Your participation is extremely important as we seek to define and solve the EJ issues in your communities. Help us in the prioritization of the needs of the community. If you have technical information or resource needs, let us know what those are so we can help with that. Give us your recommendations, work with us through the process, and at the end of the day, if we've made commitments, hold us to those commitments.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and I hope these conversations continue, as I said at the beginning, beyond at this table. Thank you.